At True Echo, we bring you the stories that leave a mark. Real or close enough to feel real. Tales of power, pain, justice, and redemption. Stories that echo long after the video ends. Today's story is one of those moments, when silence is mistaken for weakness and prejudice faces the consequence it deserves. The hallway buzzed with the usual after-lunch chaos, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on polished tiles, and bursts of laughter echoing off the walls. Yet amid the noise, Alicia Carter moved like a shadow, quiet and deliberate, gliding past the chaos as if she didn't belong to it. Her long curls fell like a curtain around her face, obscuring her deep brown eyes, and her hands clutched a worn black journal to her chest. She had perfected the art of invisibility, not out of fear but discipline. It wasn't just that she was quiet, or that she stood out as one of the few black students in a school that still, in subtle ways, clung to the old lines of division. It was that she chose silence. She carried it like armor, a barrier between her and the world that rarely saw her beyond the surface. Jake Mitchell, on the other hand, was the noise. Blonde, tall, and smug, the football captain with an ego large enough to fill the gymnasium twice over. Wherever Jake went, the crowd parted, not out of respect but reflex. He was the kind of boy who mistook fear for admiration and cruelty for strength. And Jake? He had decided that Alicia was his next pastime. It began as it always did, with a bump. Jake would accidentally shoulder check her in the hallway, smirk as her books scattered, and toss a half-hearted "oops, didn't see you there" over his shoulder. His buddies laughed. Alicia never did. She would crouch quietly, gather her things, and walk away. No words. No reaction. That, more than anything, infuriated Jake. He thrived on breaking people, on seeing the exact moment when their spirit cracked. But Alicia's silence? It felt like defiance. Felt like a dare. The more she stayed quiet, the more Jake escalated. From bumping to blocking her locker. From snide jokes to whispered slurs loud enough for her to hear, but never loud enough for teachers to catch. Each time Alicia said nothing. She didn't even flinch. And in that calm, Jake began to unravel. He needed to break her. One afternoon, Alicia stood alone at her locker. The hallway was thinning out, students trickling into classrooms. She was tucking her journal into her bag when Jake appeared behind her, too close. He plucked the book from her hands with a swift motion and raised it high over his head. Well, what do we have here?" he drawled. Alicia turned, calm as ever. "Jake," she said evenly. "Give it back." "Oh, come on, Alicia. Don't be shy. Let's see what's inside this little book of yours." He flipped a few pages dramatically, eyes scanning the neat, slanted handwriting. He grinned. "Wow. Who knew you were such a poet?" A few students nearby paused to watch. One snorted. Another pulled out their phone. Jake was eating it up. "I said give it back." Her voice was firmer now. "And what if I don't?" Jake leaned in, whispering with venom. "What are you going to do, hit me? Sick your daddy on me?" A hush fell over the hallway. Alicia's eyes slowly lifted. For the first time she looked Jake square in the face. "Give back." Jake laughed. "Make me." In a flash the smirk died. Alicia moved. She didn't shout. Didn't threaten. She moved, fast, fluid, and precise. Before Jake could even react, his arm was twisted at an impossible angle, and he was on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. The journal fell from his hand. Alicia caught it midair, tucked it under her arm, and stepped back. Jake gasped for breath, his pride more bruised than his body. Every student in the hallway froze. Jake, the untouchable, had just been dropped like a sack of bricks, by her. Alicia didn't gloat. She didn't say a word. She simply turned and walked away, her footsteps soft against the tile. Jake didn't get up. He couldn't. And even if he could have, he wouldn't know how to face the silence that followed. Jake lay sprawled across the hallway floor, the cool tile pressing against the back of his neck, grounding him in a moment that felt unreal. His chest heaved, not from pain, but from the sheer humiliation that was washing over him in relentless waves. Around him, students stood frozen, phones half raised, mouths agape. No one laughed. No one dared. For a moment, all Jake could hear was the thudding of his own heartbeat. It was loud, fast, and panicked, the beat of someone who had just watched everything they believed about themselves collapse in 10 brutal seconds. He sat up slowly, hands bracing him on the floor, back aching, pride shattered. As he looked around, his eyes met those of his teammates, friends, followers, all of them blinking back disbelief. No one offered to help him up. No one even stepped forward. He was alone in the spotlight he'd built for himself, now exposed and helpless in it. And Alicia? She was already halfway down the hall, the black journal tucked safely under her arm, her stride steady and head high for the first time anyone could remember. Her silence hadn't changed, but now it echoed with power instead of weakness. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Jake's hands curled into fists as he pushed himself to his feet, but it wasn't anger that filled him anymore, it was fear. Confusion. Regret. He hadn't just lost a physical confrontation. He'd lost control, something he prided himself on never relinquishing. The bell rang, jolting the hallway back to life. Students murmured and moved again, but their eyes lingered on Jake. The whispers began to ripple. "Did you see that?" She dropped him like it was nothing. She didn't even break a sweat. Jake clenched his jaw and stormed off, trying to hold on to whatever fragments of his pride he could salvage. But inside, something was unraveling, something deeper than the pain in his side or the sting in his ego. He'd been exposed. Not just as a bully but as someone fragile beneath the armor of arrogance. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Alicia's eyes haunting him. Not because they were angry but because they weren't. That cold calmness, that control, it had unsettled him more than any punch ever could. He kept replaying the moment in his head. The way she'd moved, like she knew. Like she'd been trained. Like she could have done much worse if she'd wanted to, but had chosen not to. That thought stuck with him. She chose not to hurt him. Jake didn't understand it. Couldn't comprehend it. He'd spent years pushing people to their limits just to see them break. But Alicia, she'd been pushed farther than anyone, and when she finally reacted, it wasn't rage. It was discipline. There was something else too. Something Ryan Evans had said, something that had been spreading like wildfire through the school group chats all evening. "She's the daughter of Marcus Carter." Jake had scoffed when he first read it. But then he looked it up. Videos, articles, military honors, interviews with national publications, photos of Marcus Carter training Navy SEALs and professional MMA fighters. The man was a legend, feared, respected, and deeply disciplined. And Alicia was his daughter. Jake's throat went dry. He remembered laughing when someone once mentioned Alicia's dad was some kind of martial arts guy. He hadn't paid attention. He hadn't cared. Now it all made sense. The silence. The composure. The speed. She wasn't afraid of him. She had never been afraid. Jake realized then that all his torment, all the bullying and taunts, they hadn't dented her. She had let him believe he was in control when the truth was she had been the one holding back. He felt sick to his stomach. The next morning the school didn't feel the same. Jake felt every stare like a spotlight on his skin. Conversations died when he passed. He caught pieces of them sharp as razors. "Guess being loud doesn't make you strong? Did you see how fast she dropped him? Dude, she's a beast. Like, trained for combat beast." He walked faster. Avoided eye contact. But it didn't help. The story had already become legend. Even some teachers were talking in hushed voices. And worst of all, Alicia remained completely unchanged. She walked the same path, wore the same expression, spoke to no one unless she had to. But this time people moved out of her way. Not from fear but from a new respect. One she had earned not with violence but restraint. Jake watched her from a distance, feeling something he had never felt before. Not anger, not envy. Shame. He couldn't shake the memory of her voice, soft but firm. "Give me the necklace now or you will regret it." He had. Deeply. And now he didn't know how to make it right. Jake had never known shame like this. It clung to him like smoke, seeping into every corner of his day. He used to stroll through the hallways like he owned them, chest high, grinning, his posse flanking him like loyal soldiers. Now those same hallways felt tighter, narrower, colder. Every corner held a pair of eyes, every glance a silent reminder of what had happened. The whispers never stopped. Not in the lunchroom, not in the locker room, not even during class. He wasn't Jake the King anymore. He was the boy who got taken down by the quiet girl, the one who thought silence meant softness. The more he tried to shake it off, to ignore the sting in his gut, the heavier it felt. The truth wasn't just eating at him, it was reconstructing him brick by brick. What haunted him most wasn't the fall. It wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't even the way Alicia had moved, fast, precise, terrifying. No. What haunted Jake was the moment after. She didn't finish him. She didn't yell. Didn't scream. Didn't call him out in front of the crowd. She looked at him, calm, centered, and simply walked away. That choice, that mercy, it broke something in him. She could have destroyed him in every possible way. Instead she spared him. And now he didn't know what to do with that grace. Alicia, on the other hand, was unmoved. Her footsteps were no heavier than before, her gaze no sharper. She remained the same quiet presence, just more visible now. And strangely more alone. While some students stared at her with awe, few dared speak to her. No one asked about her father or her past. They whispered around her, not to her. She preferred it that way. The secret was out, yes. But it hadn't changed her. If anything, it had reaffirmed everything her father had taught her. True power is quiet. It waits. It doesn't flaunt. Still, she wasn't proud of what happened with Jake. She hadn't lost control, barely, but she had crossed the line she swore never to cross again. And while everyone around her talked like it was a victory, to Alicia, it felt like a near failure. A close call. A temptation. That night she called her father. She hadn't spoken to him about it yet. But she knew he'd already heard. His connections were too far-reaching, his awareness too sharp not to know. When he picked up, his voice was calm, low. "Hey, baby girl." She swallowed. "Hey, Dad." Pause. Then, "You okay?" "I think so. You want to talk about it?" A longer pause. She closed her eyes. I kept control. I didn't hurt him, not really. I had to make him stop." On the other end, Marcus Carter sighed. Not disappointed. Not angry. Just deeply thoughtful. "Did you give him a warning?" "Yes." "More than one?" "3. "Then you did what you had to do." That was all he said. But it meant everything. The next day, Jake stood in front of the mirror in the boys' bathroom, staring at himself. His face looked the same. But everything else felt different. He didn't know who he was anymore. And more than anything, he didn't know how to face her. His pride whispered, "You don't need to apologize." But something deeper, something he hadn't listened to before, whispered louder. "You do." So when he saw her alone in the courtyard, sketching quietly under a tree, he knew it was time. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't rehearse it. He just walked. His hands were sweaty. His stomach a knot of nerves. His footsteps felt heavier with each step. When he reached her, Alicia didn't look up. She didn't flinch. "Hey," he said. Pause. Then she glanced up, eyes calm, unreadable. Jake cleared his throat. "I'm not here to bother you. I need to say something." Alicia said nothing. But she didn't turn him away either. Jake took a breath. "I was wrong. About everything. About you. I didn't know who you were. I didn't even care. He hesitated, the words catching in his throat. "I bullied you because it made me feel strong. But I wasn't strong. I was scared. I was weak. And I'm sorry." Alicia stared at him a long time. Then finally she nodded once. "I know." Jake blinked. "You know? You were never really trying to hurt me," she said quietly. "You were trying to prove something to yourself. That's why I didn't stop you sooner. I was waiting to see if you'd realize it before I had to show you." Jake's throat tightened. "And now you've seen." Another silence passed between them, deeper than the last. "Thank you," he whispered. "For not finishing me when you had the chance." Alicia gave a faint smile. Not of triumph. Not of satisfaction. Just a sad, knowing curve of the lips. "You finished yourself, Jake," she said gently. "I just held up the mirror." Jake sat alone on the bleachers that afternoon, long after the final bell had rung and the last of the students had scattered from the school grounds. The field before him was empty, the grass kissed by soft golden sunlight and the cool breeze of approaching fall. It was the same field where he had once basked in the cheers of hundreds, where his name had echoed in triumph after every touchdown. Now it was silent. Just like Alicia had been. And for the first time in his life, Jake understood how powerful silence could be. He stared down at his hands, those same hands that used to shove, point, command. They looked the same, but they didn't feel like they belonged to the same person anymore. They trembled with the memory of what they had taken from others, and what they had almost lost. Dignity, respect, self-worth. And what gnawed at him the most was the realization that Alicia, in her silence, had always carried those things. Even when no one gave them to her. Even when he actively tried to strip them away. He had never really seen her before. Jake leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his eyes stinging, not from tears but from clarity. The clarity that came after the storm. He thought about what Alicia had said earlier that day under the tree. "You finished yourself, Jake. I just held up the mirror." It was a phrase that echoed like gospel in his mind. She hadn't humiliated him. She hadn't shamed him. She hadn't tried to ruin his reputation. She had simply let him see himself for what he was, and that had been enough. He'd built his identity on domination. On being feared, obeyed, admired. And now he saw how flimsy that foundation truly was. All it took was a girl who refused to break. A girl who chose restraint over revenge. A girl who walked away instead of stepping on him while he was down. A girl stronger than he had ever been. Across the school, Alicia packed her bag in the library, where she always went to escape the buzz of after-school noise. She'd thought the silence would be more peaceful after everything that happened, but oddly, it wasn't. It felt heavier now. Not because she regretted what she had done, but because she was finally facing the ripple effect of it all. Her secret was out. The girl no one noticed was now the girl everyone stared at. Some with awe, some with fear, and some with uncomfortable admiration they didn't know how to express. But no one dared treat her like she was invisible anymore. And that, in some strange way, was the loneliest feeling of all. Her father had always told her that silence was both sword and shield. But he had also warned her, when people learn what you're capable of, they'll treat you differently. Not always better. Sometimes worse. Most times just different. Alicia had thought she could avoid that by keeping her world quiet. But Jake had changed everything. Not just with his cruelty, but with his transformation. She didn't expect him to change. Not really. But when he stood in front of her that day and offered something raw, real, and utterly vulnerable, something shifted. Not just in him, but in her. Alicia no longer saw Jake as the villain in her story. He was something far more complex now. A mirror of everything that went wrong in people, and everything that could go right, if they were brave enough to face themselves. She closed her journal, the pages fluttering shut like a breath exhaled. Her fingers lingered on the spine, remembering how it had once been snatched from her hands. And how she had taken it back, not just with force but with a lesson. She didn't want revenge. She wanted change. And maybe, just maybe, Jake was proof that change was possible. That weekend, Alicia stood in the backyard behind her house, barefoot in the grass, her eyes closed as the wind moved around her. Her father stood a few feet away, arms crossed, observing her posture. "Breath steady," Marcus Carter said. "Center yourself." "I'm trying." "Don't try. Be." She exhaled through her nose, lifted one hand into a blocking stance and swept it down smoothly. Then again. Then another move. Faster. Controlled. "You're not angry, are you?" her father asked. "No. Not at Jake." "No," she said. "I think he's angry enough at himself." Marcus nodded. "Then you've already won." Alicia's eyes opened, steady, sharp. "It doesn't feel like winning." "Because you didn't fight to win," he said. "You fought to protect. That's the only fight worth winning." They moved in silence for a while. Their motions flowed in rhythm, strength coiled beneath every movement. Until Alicia paused. "Dad." "Yeah." "Was it wrong to let people know?" Marcus looked at her for a long time. "No," he said. "But now they'll expect you to be more than you are. Just remember, you don't owe them anything. Just keep being you. Quiet. Strong. True." Alicia looked at her father, and for the first time since everything unfolded, she smiled. Not out of pride. Out of peace. Monday came like a whisper after the storm. The school felt different now, not louder, not quieter, but more aware. Whispers didn't flow so freely anymore. Not about Alicia. Not about Jake. There was a shift in the air, something unspoken but deeply understood. The old hierarchy had crumbled and no one knew what to replace it with. Jake walked through the front doors that morning with his backpack slung low and his eyes cast slightly downward, not in defeat but in humility. Every day since that confrontation had been a lesson and he was still learning, still trying. He no longer traveled with an entourage. The friends who used to orbit him like planets around a sun now scattered, drifting toward more predictable gravitational pulls. And honestly, Jake didn't blame them. He barely recognized himself either. What surprised him though was who didn't pull away. Ryan Evans. One of the few who never joined in the bullying, but also never stood in its way. The same Ryan who had outed Alicia's identity in the hallway, who had shown the world that the quiet girl held more strength than anyone had guessed. Now, Ryan stood by his locker and nodded at Jake as he passed. "Hey," Ryan said. Jake stopped. "Hey." There was a pause. "You holding up?" Ryan asked. Jake gave a tired chuckle. "Depends what you mean by holding up." "Yeah," Ryan said. "Fair." Another pause. This one longer. Then Jake spoke again. "You didn't have to say what you did that day. About Alicia's dad." "I know." Jake nodded, waiting. "So why did you?" Ryan looked at him, his expression honest but unreadable. "Because you weren't listening to her. And I figured maybe you'd listen if you knew the kind of man she was raised by." Jake let that settle. He didn't argue. Couldn't. Ryan was right. It had taken a public collapse of his ego for him to hear what Alicia had been saying all along, without ever needing to speak. "I'm glad you did," Jake said quietly. "Even if I wasn't ready for it." Ryan clapped a hand on his shoulder. "No one ever is. You just figure it out in the rubble." Alicia watched them from a distance. Not in judgment. Not in fear. Just in quiet observation. She wasn't used to seeing Jake like this. No arrogance, no swagger. Just a guy trying to carry the weight of his own mistakes. There was something oddly honest about him now. Vulnerable even. And Alicia respected that more than any apology. The truth was, she had forgiven him the moment he fell. Not because he deserved it, but because she did. Carrying hate would have only tethered her to him forever. And she'd spent enough time being defined by someone else's cruelty. Now she wanted freedom. As she walked past the lockers, the noise of morning banter surrounded her. Less curious than last week, more normalized now. The whispers had faded. The awe had softened. What was left was something closer to normalcy. A new version of it, anyway. Some students nodded at her. A few smiled, a little unsure but not mocking. And for once, Alicia didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Not as a threat. Not as a symbol. Just as herself. That afternoon, she stayed after school for her usual routine. Library, journaling, quiet. But when she exited into the breezeway, she found Jake waiting by the bike racks, fidgeting with the strap on his bag. She didn't flinch. Just walked past him. "Alicia." She stopped, turned halfway. "Yeah." He took a breath. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything. About who I was. Who I want to be." She waited. Jake rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm not asking for anything. Not forgiveness. Not friendship. I just wanted to say, thank you. For not destroying me when you had the chance. For showing me who I really was. And for not saying anything when you could have embarrassed me worse than I embarrassed myself." There was a beat of silence. Then Alicia spoke, her voice calm, soft as ever. "I didn't do it for you, Jake. I know. I did it for me." Jake nodded slowly. "I get that now." She took a step closer, her eyes meeting his. Not with resentment, but with something deeper. Something resolute. "You don't have to apologize every time you see me," she said. "You just have to change. That's enough." He looked down, nodding again. "I will," he said. "I promise I will." And she believed him. Not because of his words, but because he didn't say them to win her over. He said them to free himself. She walked away, her silver leaf pendant glinting in the sunlight, the only sound the soft crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. Jake stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the empty space where she'd been. In that silence, for once, he felt peace. The leaves had begun to fall, painting the school courtyard in strokes of amber and rust. Each breeze carried a whisper of change, soft but unmistakable, mirroring the transformation that had unfolded within its walls. In the weeks following the incident, the story of Jake and Alicia had faded from gossip and spectacle into something quieter, more reflective. No longer a scandal. No longer a sensation. Just a lesson. Jake had changed, slowly and visibly. He sat alone more often, not out of shame anymore, but by choice. He listened more. Spoke less. When he did speak, his words came with a weight of sincerity that hadn't been there before. He stopped laughing at cruel jokes. Stopped ignoring the quiet students in the back of the class. Stopped pretending he had nothing to learn from people he once thought beneath him. There was one particular moment that marked a turning point, not for him but for others watching. It happened during gym class. Coach Harris had partnered students randomly for sparring drills. Jake was paired with Jordan Miller, a sophomore who had once been the frequent butt of Jake's jokes. Small, wiry, and painfully shy, Jordan had flinched when Jake approached him. Everyone watched. Jake noticed it too. The way Jordan braced for a hit that hadn't come yet. And instead of stepping onto the mat with bravado, Jake did something no one expected. He sat down. Cross-legged. "Come. You good if we just practice footwork?" he asked, voice low, non-threatening. "Not trying to win. Just want to get better." Jordan blinked, stunned. Then nodded. The drill proceeded without incident. No jeers. No superiority. No ego. Just two students on equal ground. And when it ended, Jake offered his hand. Not in dominance, but in respect. Word spread quickly. Not as gossip. Not even as surprise. Just as fact. Jake Mitchell wasn't the same. Meanwhile, Alicia remained as quiet as ever, but people had begun to treat her differently. Not out of fear or distance, but with a quiet reverence. She no longer had to shrink herself to avoid attention. She existed now, fully and unapologetically, and no one dared mistake that for weakness. Her teachers began to call on her more in class. Her peers asked for help with projects or sat beside her in the cafeteria without hesitation. Even Principal Morris called her in one afternoon, not to discipline, but to ask if she'd consider mentoring other students in the school's new self-defense program. She declined. Not because she wasn't qualified, but because she didn't want her strength to become a spectacle. Not again. "I don't want to be a symbol," she told him simply. "I just want to be me." And that was enough. One crisp Friday afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the school's aging brick walls, Alicia found herself standing alone on the empty track field. She hadn't planned to be there. She just walked, thinking, breathing, processing. Then she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, half expecting Jake. It was Ryan. He jogged to a stop beside her, hands on hips, catching his breath. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said. "You didn't." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the horizon blur into gold. "Jake's different now," Ryan finally said. "I know," Alicia replied. "He says it's because of you." Alicia looked at him. "It's because of himself. I just gave him the mirror." Ryan smiled faintly. "You're a lot stronger than most people I know." "I've had to be," she said. He hesitated. "You ever get tired of it?" Alicia nodded. "All the time. But you still keep going." "Because I have no choice." She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was just honest. Ryan seemed to understand that. He didn't try to comfort her with platitudes or empty praise. He just stood beside her, offering the only thing that mattered now, presence. And maybe that was what Alicia needed most. Not admiration. Not fear. Just someone who saw her and stayed. Later that evening, Jake sat at his desk, staring at a blank page in his notebook. He'd been trying to write something for days, unsure how to start. Unsure what he even wanted to say. Then, slowly he began. "To the girl I never really saw, thank you. For showing me that silence isn't emptiness. It's strength. For teaching me that true power isn't in who's loudest, or who hits hardest. It's in knowing who you are, even when the world tries to define you. I used to think I was the strong one, but I was just the loud one. You were strong before anyone ever noticed. Before anyone ever clapped. And maybe I'll never deserve your respect. But I'll spend every day trying to become someone who could." He paused, then tore out the page, folded it, and placed it in the back of his locker. Not for Alicia. Not for anyone. For himself. Because he finally understood that the path to redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about walking forward, wounded but wiser. The first snow fell unexpectedly that December morning, dusting the school grounds in quiet white. The campus, usually buzzing with adolescent chaos, felt muted, reflective, as though the world itself had paused to breathe. Alicia stood by the front windows near the main stairwell, watching flakes drift in slow, swirling patterns. The cold beyond the glass didn't touch her, not in the way other things used to. She felt calm now, more rooted than she had been in years. The storm had passed. Inside her, something had shifted. Not because she'd fought Jake, but because she had faced him. And more importantly, she had faced herself, her restraint, her past, her fear of what she might become if she lost control again. She hadn't lost control. She had found clarity. A student passed behind her and paused. "Hey, Alicia," the girl said softly. Alicia turned, eyebrows raised. The girl fumbled with her words. "I just wanted to say, you really help people here. More than you know." Alicia blinked, surprised. "Thank you." And it was sincere. Not performative. Not obligatory. The girl nodded and walked off, leaving Alicia alone again, but no longer lonely. The hallway was hers now, not a battlefield but a bridge. A place where silence no longer equaled invisibility. Jake stood outside the guidance office, staring at a flyer on the bulletin board. Peer Mediation Club, new members welcome. Learn to lead, learn to listen. 6 weeks ago he would have laughed at that poster. Maybe even torn it down just to make someone feel small. Now, he read every word twice. He wasn't proud of the path that brought him here, but he wasn't ashamed to be here either. Shame had already done its work. What remained now was a slow rebuild. Day by day, action by action. He reached into his bag and pulled out a form, his application filled out, folded, and refolded again like it was sacred. He smoothed it out against the wall, then walked inside. When the counselor glanced up, she raised an eyebrow. "Jake Mitchell?" He nodded. Yeah, I want to join. I need to learn how to listen better. She tilted her head, observing him. And why now? He didn't flinch. Because I used to be loud for the wrong reasons. And now, I'd rather be quiet for the right ones. That Friday afternoon, the school held its winter assembly. Students filled the gymnasium, murmuring, half listening as the principal ran through honor roll names, sports accolades, and volunteer awards. Alicia didn't plan to attend, but a teacher had asked her to sit near the front. As the final speaker wrapped up, Principal Morris stepped to the microphone. Before we close, we want to recognize 2 students, not for winning a game or achieving high grades, but for something much more difficult. Growth. A murmur spread across the room. Jake Mitchell, Alicia Carter, he said, please join me on stage. The crowd stilled. Students turned in their seats. Alicia's heartbeat quickened. She hadn't been told this would happen. From across the gym, Jake slowly rose too. They met halfway, their eyes locking briefly. No tension. No fear. Just understanding. They stepped onto the stage together, side by side. Principal Morris spoke again. We talk often about consequences here. But not enough about redemption. Jake and Alicia have shown us what it means to face truth, to change, and to rise above judgment. Not just toward others, but toward themselves. A gentle applause began, uncertain but genuine. It grew row by row. Jake didn't speak. Neither did Alicia. They didn't need to. They just stood there, no longer victim and bully, no longer silence and noise, but 2 people who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the strongest ones are not those who strike, but those who resist the urge to do so. And those brave enough to say, I was wrong. And I want to be better. The moment didn't last long, but it didn't have to. It was enough. Later that evening, Alicia found herself in the old courtyard again, the snow crunching softly beneath her boots. She looked up at the sky, catching flakes on her eyelashes, the cold brushing her cheeks like a memory. Jake approached quietly from the opposite side, hands in his coat pockets. He stopped a few feet away. You're not scared anymore, he said. I never was, she replied. I just chose peace over power. He nodded. I think I understand that now. Alicia looked at him, her breath rising in slow, visible clouds. Then make sure the next person like me doesn't have to teach you again. Jake offered a faint smile. I will. A beat. Then, gently, Alicia extended her hand. Jake took it. No drama. No crowd. No spotlight. Just 2 people standing in the stillness of winter, where once there had only been conflict, and now, a quiet promise of something better. In a world that too often confuses silence for weakness and loudness for strength, this story reminds us that true power is found in self-control, in growth, and in the courage to change. Whether you're the one who's been hurt or the one who did the hurting, redemption starts the moment you choose to listen. As Alicia proved, strength isn't about domination, it's about discipline. And as Jake learned, you don't become better by being feared. You become better by facing yourself. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. What moment hit you the hardest? What would you do if you were Jake? Don't forget to subscribe to True Echo, where every week we bring you powerful stories that expose hidden strength, challenge injustice, and inspire change. Because your silence can echo louder than any scream.